It's great to have so many of you with us this morning and for the kickoff of our Reimagining assessment practicum. So welcome to course session 1, focusing on why and how equity matters in assessment. I'm Jennifer Keyes, Senior Director of the Searle Center, playing the role of moderator today and joined by a fantastic panel of colleagues from across the university. The panel will discuss a broad range of topics today, including definitions, transparency, rigor, bias, and culture. At 10:40, we'll open up the conversation for questions from others, and feel free to use the chat to post questions along the way. You can also use the upvote feature so that our moderator, Sandoval Lee, can determine what is of greatest interest and what hasn't already been covered in the conversation. And if you prefer to save your questions until the end and join us on camera, plenty of time for that as well. So what I'd like to do now is to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and to please share one idea that you found compelling from Robert Talbert's work or keynote on moving towards more humane, authentic, and trustworthy ways to evaluate student work. So I'll call in the order of my screen, starting with Lori Dietz.
Thanks, Jen, and good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name's Lori Dietz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Pedagogy and Curricular Development at the Searle Center. And one line that really has stuck with me from Talbert's talk was that we do not want to penalize people for passing through badness.
Thank you. Jim.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Stachowiak. I am the Accessible Technology Strategy and Operations Lead for the university, and that straddles Accessible NU and NUIT, and I work with digital accessibility and universal design for learning and students with disabilities. I'll tell you what, the thing that stuck with me was the story that he told at the very beginning when he was talking about the student that he had that could get everything in a week, but a week longer than what it took everyone else to do. And it struck me because we've had those students at Northwestern. I've worked with those students before, and I can think of one in particular who was a computer science student who would be excellent by the end of the term, but was always falling behind because the pace was just too quick for him, and the assessments were coming up too quick. But if you let him do it at his pace, and at the end of the quarter, he was probably the best student in that course. So I think a lot of the stuff that he was talking about is definitely things that we could apply and have an impact right away here at Northwestern.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, Hillary.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Hillary Zimmerman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am in Northwestern's Office for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion. And my title is Director of Diversity Initiatives, Assessment, and Evaluation. And so I'm very excited to be with you all. A piece that has stuck with me. So I have a 5-year-old. She's in kindergarten this year. And his piece around grades lacking construct validity has been really interesting conversation in my house as my 5-year-old starts to come home and ask me, what does an A mean? And what does a B mean? And what does a C mean? And to be honest, I don't have any more words to tell her what those things mean. And that piece really stuck with me just as far as conversations we've been having around our own dinner table.
Thank you. Jackie.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Wickham-Smith. I'm a senior learning designer in the School of Professional Studies. And what really stuck with me from Talbert's keynote was a point that I thought he just kind of hit on really briefly, which was how all the strategies he's recommending look different in different fields. And we really have a lot to learn from each other in terms of how we could apply these things across our departments.
Thank you. That's an excellent segue into our next, where we're talking about different approaches, definitions, and really the importance of equitable assessment. So I'm going to start with a question for Lori. And I'd like you to just, as our Director of Pedagogy and Curricular Development, can you give us a definition of assessment and how it is distinct from grading?
Absolutely, really important question here. So assessment is a student learning process. And so I think the key word here is process. It's a continuous process of improvement that is looking at the whole context of student learning. I think Talbert talked about it in terms of a feedback loop, and that loop is very much what's at the heart of assessing student learning. So our first step is identifying and really knowing what it is we want students to learn. And then we create those experiences so that they can learn those things. And then we've got to gather data. And those data are the feedback pieces that inform us and students about how they're progressing towards those learning goals. And then we have to assess the degree to which we need to make adjustments so that students can stay on track for learning. And so that might be changing our course design, an assignment, slowing down, speeding up. All of those adjustments can happen on both the micro level as well as the macro level. So I think all of us as instructors are assessing all the time, whether or not we're calling it assessment. So you can be in class and see furrowed brows of confusion and know that, okay, maybe I need to pause and see what's causing that confusion and adjust. It can also be more formal where you're collecting responses to quizzes or reflections on what they think the meaning behind a poem is, and use that to decide how you want to plan future lessons and continue back to it. And then at the macro level, we're really thinking about how students are progressing through the course overall, or really what so much of what we focus on at the Searle Center too, is how they're progressing through the curriculum. It's different than grades because grades stop the process. They are a snapshot of performance in a moment of time. And so that's why it's important to distinguish.
Interesting. So assessment is really in the recalibration is where it starts to make a difference in student experience and student learning and the whole course design, all aspects. Thank you. I'm going to ask a slightly varied question for the rest of our panel. I'd like you to speak from your vantage point, your role at Northwestern University, and what do you see as the relationship between equity, learning, and assessment? And we'll start with Hillary.
Yes, so building on Lori's really great definition and thoughts around assessment as a process and a feedback loop and connected to the learning that people are doing, then when you think about for my role in particular in a central office function and thinking about equity and how there can be lots of different pathways through a process. There can be lots of different speeds through a process. There can be lots of different ways that people navigate challenges in processes. And bringing equity into the conversation helps us then understand that sometimes students' backgrounds, sometimes their social identities, their cultural beliefs, the ways that they impact the ways that they experience learning and that they experience processes and that they experience and navigate those processes. And so I think equity and the idea of assessment as a process really go hand in hand in understanding the nuance that comes into learning for students who are, adults for all of us in the context of being, 18 and kind of early adolescence. I don't know if we can fully call them adults, but as they're sort of developing in their brains and learning. So those are kind of how I think about them together.
Thank you so much. How about Jim?
My thoughts are very similar to Hillary's. She's looking at it as kind of the different backgrounds people bring in. We look at a very specific, different type of background, and that's our students with disabilities, right? And so we know that all of them go through these processes very differently. I had once heard a similar description of what Lori was talking about, but like assessment is like a physical exam, whereas final grades are like an autopsy. And you can make those adjustments on the physical exam. You can see what's happening throughout and make proper adjustments to move things forward in the right direction. And I think, again, with our students with disabilities, which we have a number of at Northwestern, it may take checking in a little more frequently with some of those students through maybe some more frequent, shorter assessments to make sure folks are on track and make adjustments where adjustments need to be made.
It's a bit grim, but I guess Halloween appropriate and certainly memorable. How about Jackie from your vantage point?
Yeah, I don't have an analogy or metaphor as good as Jim's, but from my specific vantage point in the School of Professional Studies, working with adult students, one of the things we really focus on in assessment is how students are being equipped to meet their future goals and the goals of the workforce. And so that's an ongoing process. And with adult students, they're always bringing in, as Hillary and Jim alluded to, not only different levels of life experience that happened in the first 18 to 22 years of their lives, but different levels of professional experience as well that may inform how they interact with the material and how they interact with each other. So what we want to do is bring all of those things together and ensure that we're following up and making sure that they're prepared to progress into the next stage of their career and meet whatever their individual goals are.
I really appreciate you bringing in that conversation about career readiness. I think that's important, thinking about what the next step is as a kind of anticipatory socialization, helping them move their career goals forward. So let's switch to our next topic, which is about transparency in the assessment process. We'll dig in a little bit more about how transparency helps advance equity in the assessment process. Jim, can you start us off in that conversation?
Yeah, yes, I can. There's a couple of points that I want to hit on this, and I'm going to start specifically from the students with disabilities perspective, and I'll let you folks know too, just numbers wise. Last year, we had 2,100 students that were registered with Accessible NU for having a disability and having accommodations on campus. That number has gone up by about 11% a year over time. We've also seen that the biggest area of impact, or not impact, I guess the biggest area of growth in students with disabilities is students with mental health conditions. A lot of times anxiety is related to that, depression, that kind of thing. And we know that's not just our students registered with disabilities. There are a number of students who experience, mental health conditions throughout the course of a quarter. So being transparent on what is being assessed can help alleviate some of that anxiety that students experience that may be beyond the anxiety in a typical college experience. That can help make a more equitable assessment if they have an idea of what type of things they're going to be assessed on there. The other piece that I wanted to hit on here too is we focus on a lot of universal design for learning, and part of that is offering multiple means of expression, which would be multiple types of assessment, giving students options in how they are assessed, or what they or how they share what they've learned, how they share what they've experienced here. And a lot of instructors struggle initially with that concept of how do I give an option and grade those options equitably. Well, if we're transparent about what it is that we're looking to assess, if we're transparent about what those learning outcomes are, and we really think through what is it that we're trying to assess here, and we have solid learning outcomes, we can create options for assessments, whether that be, typically we write a paper here, but we're going to allow somebody to either write a paper or record a video presentation. If we have solid learning outcomes that we're locked in on what we're trying to assess there, we can equitably assess however somebody wants to, or however we give them the option to bring that across. So, they can demonstrate those learning objectives speaking something in a recording, or they can demonstrate them writing something in a paper. If we just have to make sure we're transparent on what those learning outcomes are going to be that we're looking to assess.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, let's talk about specific strategies that can help promote transparency. Lori, what are some things, if you're working with a faculty member, with a graduate student instructor, what are some of your tips?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the benefits of being an educational developer is I get to see a lot of different examples of assignments and syllabi. And so I am learning all the time when I get to work with faculty and graduate student instructors. And so one specific strategy that I've observed, that I've picked up and put into my own teaching practice, is really about building off what Jim was saying about being very transparent about what your learning outcomes are, what your learning expectations are for students, and then to think creatively about how to create a map in your Canvas site or your syllabus or your assignments. So one tip that I saw that from another faculty member that I use is I create icons for each of my learning outcomes. So little symbols, they could be emoji. Sometimes I've used emoji as those icons. And then for every class session or every activity, every assignment, I include those icons with it so that students are constantly seeing, here's an activity that we're doing to help them gain confidence in public speaking, or here's an activity that we're doing where the goal is to help them practice analysis. And to me, that ongoing reinforcement that everything we're doing is tying to one or more, whether it's one of those small informal things or a larger thing, I think really helps with that transparency.
That's a great technique, and that's kind of visual icon that becomes memorable to them. It can be incorporated into the syllabus. That's fantastic. How about Jackie?
Yeah, I was actually going to share an extremely similar strategy to what Lori shared, and that's not only calling back to the learning objectives, but providing frequent written context. I work mostly with fully online and asynchronous courses. So being able to zoom out and and remind students of the big picture, when sometimes I know all of our students feel like they're just going through a checklist, just got to cross all that stuff off. But being able to help them take a step back and doing it in a consistent and visually consistent way throughout the course site in an online class, I think it can be really helpful for students in knowing what to expect. Also, that ties to what Jim said about universal design for learning. We encourage our faculty to use both writing as well as audio or video to provide that context and transparency for students, because especially in an online class, it's important that students can access that information in multiple ways.
That's great. Hillary.
Yes, so prior to my role at Northwestern, I had done some adjunct teaching in a master's program. And so we did a lot of, I would reserve kind of the last 5 minutes of my class every class session. And it would be an assignment check-in. But in particular, it would be a check-in for students to ask questions, but for me to really connect the assignment to actually what I wanted them to learn from it. I was very intentional in how I set up assignments and the types of evidence I was going to look for them to say, yes, I know this material, or maybe we need a check-in on what we know about the material, but really connecting it, I think, to the learning so that it then just doesn't feel like an assignment for assignment's sake, or because I need to have points to give some sort of grade at the end, but connecting it to that, and then how they could use it for them in a professional applied context after, because they were matched their students. So that is something that I found kind of on the transparency in assignments, and was really successful.
I like that. It's really about pulling back the curtains for students on your own thinking and the way that you've designed the course. And then adding to what Jackie said, it's about helping the students understand the value of the course, how it fits into their academic journeys and to their future goals as well. All right, so the next one is one to grapple with a little bit. It's one that we've talked a lot about among the content committee as we put together the practicum. So the relationship between rigor and equity, can the two coexist? So let's start with Jackie.
So my answer is yes. Very short answer. However, I think that it really gets back to what everyone has alluded to a couple times, especially in the last question about transparency, which is aligning the rigor with the learning outcomes. So many times people align rigor with time and stress, rather than can we really tell that students have done what we needed them to do? Have we met students where they're at, and are we bringing them to where they need to be? And we can do that. And, if this is where we need them to be is an extremely rigorous place, every student is going to encounter a different amount of work to get from where they started to where they needed to be, whether that's about where they started or who they are and how they progress through that material. So I think keeping those different learning paths in mind is really crucial as we consider the balance between rigor and equity.
Yeah. Jim.
I mean, I'll second what Jackie said, and I think it also goes back to, we deal with this question a lot around universal design for learning as well, right? Like, can you UDL a course and still have the rigor that's necessary in there? And I just want to give an example that shows that yes, you can do this. And again, it ties back to the learning objectives and what you are trying to accomplish. But there's a prof in I think he's in engineering, who was going through our UDL practicum last year, and right before midterms asked the students, or a couple weeks before midterms, do you guys want to do a standard midterm this year, or do you want to have options for how we get through this exam assessment? All the students chose options. So he said, you could either design a circuit, gave some specifications around that. I forget what the second option was, some kind of explanation of why this would work a certain way. And then the third option was write a children's book about this circuit process. And the students had a choice of what they could do. When he did some data tracking on this and said students spent more time working on this project than they would on the midterm. He said, based on what he saw, they got more depth of knowledge on those topics than what they would have going over a standard assessment, and they seem to connect with that material a little bit better. And so, there was still a very rigorous approach to that, but providing options for students in how they were assessed. And I think a lot of them, the first time around, chose that children's book, not realizing how difficult it was going to be to explain that circuit process to 10-year-olds. But he asked again after that, do you want a standard final exam, or do you want to do this again? 39 out of the 40 students said we want to do this again. Fewer chose the children's book the second time around, but they had that option for assessment, and the rigor was definitely there to the point where they had to put that work in and really dive into that specific topic.
What an engaging way to get students to kind of think in non-traditional ways, but clearly that was a captivating assignment for their attention. How about Hillary?
So yes to everything people have said so far, just yes, +1. As I was kind of thinking about rigor and where that fits into curriculum and assessment and learning, I did actually dig into Talbert's blog a little bit. And so interestingly, he has a couple of blogs on rigor, and one of them sort of on what does that even mean, and then kind of a companion piece around if what you're looking for when you say rigor is about trusting the credibility of your outcomes, or trusting and the sort of the validity of the learning, and that students have actually learned what you set out for them to learn with your assignments, and that you were able to have kind of high standards for that. Well, then we can have kind of a discussion about, okay, what does that mean, and how do we make sure that's happening in our courses for students? And so I thought that was really interesting, and kind of helped me lock in then that I came up at a time when like bell grade curving was a thing, like I was in school. And so no, not everyone could get an A in your class, or not everyone could, be exemplary in your class. And I think we've leaned more into, well, if students are learning what you say they're learning, why can't everyone have sort of, you did a great job? Why not? Like, they learned what you said you wanted them to learn. And so for me, this idea of rigor becomes then about, as the faculty member, being really clear about what it is that students should learn and that we want them to learn and why we want them to learn it. and then not moving the goalposts. So not yes, no, not everyone gets the participation award, but we also don't move the goalposts on them either. And we kind of stay true to those things. And then I think you can embed rigor in your courses.
Absolutely. Thanks for suggesting that. And I see that Un has put a link to the post that you were referring to, Hillary. But right, just like defining all the other things we're talking about today, let's define rigor. What do we mean by that? And if it's achievement of the learning outcomes, then what sorts of grading practices align with that? How about Jackie? Oh, sorry, Lori.
Oh, it's
Lori
Lori
on this one. Yes, Jackie already gave us an excellent answer to that question.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, to build off all of these really great responses, when I think about rigor, I'm right now really thinking about the latest Boyer report, which put out the equity excellence imperative. And this is essentially saying that we can't have excellence without equity, just as we can't have equity without excellence. And so to me, when we really are attuned to equitable assessment practices, it really allows us to raise that bar. And so I come from the humanities, I teach writing. Many students at Northwestern, they could write an A paper out of the gate, but that's not the point, right? The point is to get students to stretch and to grow as writers and as thinkers. So for me, rigor is about really thinking about how do I get students to reach their next peak? How do I push them through whatever kind of stretch and growth goal they may have for themselves as writers, but that I also have for them as writers. And what that requires is for them to take risks, to fail, right? And to try again. But that's how we really get to that kind of depth of rigor and excellence. And so to me, having those assessment practices where they and you can constantly see and make those adjustments to push, that gets all students to really excel at a much higher level.
Second, growing beyond where they currently are. Let's talk a little bit now about bias. Hillary, I'd like you to speak to how assessments can be biased against a particular group of students.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with an example. It's not a K-12 example. It's a K-12 example. It's not a higher ed example. But in my previous undergraduate life, I thought I was going to be a speech pathologist. And so I went to school for speech pathology, and part of my education was to work for a semester or volunteer for a semester in a classroom, helping some sort of speech related things. So I was in an English language learning third grade classroom. And so my students primarily spoke Spanish. A couple of them spoke Portuguese, but primarily Spanish or Portuguese. And they all spoke it solely at home. And then the classroom was their first situation where they were kind of immersed in English for large chunks of time. And so we had to work a lot on vocabulary and understanding assessments. And they were a lot of tests, and they had a lot of flashcards. And I will never forget one. And there's a video out about this on YouTube too, where it shows this example, but I had these flashcards too. And so one of them was you had pictures of things, and the student was supposed to tell you in English what that picture was. And then another one was you had the written word, and then the student was supposed to match the written word to the picture to kind of get different ways of getting at things. And so there was one student that I had that I was working through my flashcards with, and a picture comes up, and it's a couch, and you can accept couch or sofa. And he knew what couch or sofa was. So we get through all of the picture cards, and then we move over to the word card. And the word that comes up is the word Davenport. And now I don't know how many of you grew up with my grandmother or different grandparents of your own, but my grandmother used the word Davenport, which for those of you who don't know is the same word essentially for their intents and purposes as couch or sofa. However, it's kind of an antiquated word. Not a lot of people use it that much anymore. We've shortened it to couch and sofa. And that student did not know what a Davenport was. And if I'm honest, some of the teachers in that room also didn't know what Davenport was. But did that mean he didn't know what couch was? Or did that mean he didn't know what sofa was? And did that he could read the word Davenport, he just didn't know what it meant. And so because of his cultural understanding, because of the way we all operate around words now, he didn't know what that meant, but that didn't necessarily speak to what he learned or what he knew or how he could navigate books and classrooms in the world. And so that to me is an example of just how bias can kind of creep in. He didn't have a grandmother who told him, go sit on the plastic covered Davenport. And so I talk a lot about that example because really bias in assessment we uncover it or it creeps in when we think about how certain assessments can privilege a certain type of knowledge or a certain type of academic or social capital, or even certain types of learning or preference certain types of evidence. And so I'm loving this conversation around kind of having different ways for students, not necessarily a paper. Maybe they can do a video or a voice recording or something like that, because then we can provide other avenues that really match how a student can best demonstrate what they know.
That's such a great example. Thank you for sharing it. Let's talk about, so we don't want to just bring up the problem of bias, right? We want to think about strategies that we can bring in to mitigate that bias. So Jim, can you talk about an approach or a way that we can kind of acknowledge this issue and address it?
Yes, and I'm going to go back to the approach that I've been talking about kind of throughout, right? This idea, Hillary just hit on it a little bit, this idea of multiple means of expression for students and offering options. When we talk about options, though, again, this can trigger people to go, how do I create an option that meets everybody's needs? When we talk about providing options in assessment, we suggest offering one more option. If you have two options, one of those is going to be better for everybody. There may be some bias in, and I'll give an example as well. The student that I was talking about earlier today, that what I was reminded of from the Talbot talk is, when he had timed assessments, he would take them at ANU. And we would often walk in and find him laying on the ground because he was so stressed out about that assessment and the timing aspect of it. If you gave him a project over the weekend, it was typically the best done project in class. And we were trying to navigate, how can we do this in a class right now where this is already planned out, where they're all timed assessments, right? So there were some accommodations that had come into place. But if we had thought about that kind of ahead of time and worked with an instructor had put these options in place for, you can do this, this way or this way, one of two options, we might have had a much better solution for that student and similar students like that. So bias absolutely creeps in that respect as well, in that some students just cannot navigate those timed things. And are the timed tests really a thing that has to be done? Or is there another way that we can assess? And can we give one more option to an assessment that we're offering?
Yeah. And Jackie and Lori, can you each share maybe sort of one quick strategy? Jackie?
Sure. I think honestly that transparency is a huge strategy, and understanding your own why and behind an assessment and being able to be transparent about it for students. I chose to give you options on this assessment because X, or I chose not to give you options on this assessment because X. And I think so just transparency and ongoing communication with students really can help to mitigate some of that bias.
And I'll add in, this is a plug for course session 2 next week. I really like contract grading, and we'll get into the details of exactly what that is if you're not familiar with it. But essentially, contract grading is telling students that transparency of, here's a menu of options. You have to select so many from that menu of options to achieve different grade markers. And that essentially becomes the safety net for them. I love that in humanities and writing-based classes, because there's often a perception from students that those of us in the humanities are particularly subjective. I take issue with that. But at least for a chunk of their grade, if not all of it, it is saying that your time to experiment, to take risks, I'm more the referee of, did you do it or didn't you do it? And so that can remove some of that bias of constantly like judging them as they're going through that learning process. So to me, contract grading is a really effective way for mitigating bias.
Yeah, those seem like really good strategies for self-efficacy, autonomy, a lot of value there. Our last question focuses on culture. So how can Northwestern continue to enhance a culture where equity and assessment is a shared responsibility? Jackie, can you start us off with that question?
Sure. And I'm going to throw it back again to the keynote. One other point that I really appreciated was when Talbert said that we should concentrate on small wins. You know, the first question you asked us in this panel was, from the vantage point of our own role at Northwestern, what do we see as the relationship between equity, learning, and assessment? And I think if we can take that vantage point, our own definition, and try to advance it just a little bit. Jim, the example Jim just gave about convincing people to add one more option. You know, if Jim can do that, or if I can, that's a big thing I do in my job as well. That could be a small win for either of us, convincing people to add one more option for students on an assessment. And so I think that all of us can take a step back and consider, we're not, you know, no single one of us is going to suddenly make all the assessments equitable. And if we somehow did, they would be inequitable the next day again, right? But if we can all be thinking of small wins that we can get in on a daily or weekly basis, I think that's a great way to continue building on the culture.
Great. So in addition to small wins, how can we make student feedback central to this continuous improvement process as part of our culture of equity and assessment? Let's start with Hillary.
Yes, I'm so glad we have this question. So one of the kind of places that I go to for a lot of information about equity and assessment it's called NILOA. It's the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. And they've had a series since like 2017, pretty ongoing series where they will publish some new, almost white paper length types of reports about equity and assessment. And they have really great resources there for you. I can share those. I'll make sure those get shared. But one of the things that they have found really consistently since the beginning is having a conversation about the assessment with students, and embedding students into the process from the beginning is one of the best things you can do to ensure or start making those steps towards equity in assessment. And so sometimes that, as far as how it's central, it's very central, and how you can go about doing that is truly to have that conversation with students. And sometimes students are not used to that. Many of the students that come to Northwestern can often be used to a little bit more of like here is your grade, and this is what you got, and here's a report card, and now we are moving on. And so you really have an opportunity to invite them into a learning partnership with you, and an assessment is really the place that you can do that as far as feedback and inviting them in to ask questions and helping them understand the feedback, and really holding that as a central component of assessment.
I love that terminology, a learning partnership. How about Jim?
I just want to really quickly just second what Jackie said about the small wins. I think that's great, but I think also we want to celebrate those small wins and recognize the people that have done some of those things and share some of the stuff that has worked well for us with others, because I think that's when it's really effective, when others can see, hey, somebody did this in a similar class and it worked. Maybe that's something I can try as well. But one of the ways that we talk about incorporating student feedback is brief exit tickets from class occasionally, right? Like, hey, here's just a quick question of what difficulties are you having? Where are you running into some issues in assessments or whatnot? And we try and talk about that from a UDL perspective, as ask everybody and don't zero in on, if is this difficult for you because you have a disability type thing, but what issues might you be experiencing that impact your participation in the class, your participation in this assessment, and you'll get a wider range of answers and run into some issues that you may not be aware of, that working on some of that altering some of that assessments with some of those options and whatnot may benefit people beyond even just those folks that may have a disability as well.
And Lori.
Yes, so I just want to use this as a reminder that learning happens outside of the classroom too, and therefore assessment should be happening outside of the classroom. And so especially when we think about that culture of assessment, our student affairs at Northwestern have a really robust culture of assessment. I directed a writing center in a prior life, and we included our tutors in creating our learning outcomes, designing our assessment methods, analyzing them, making changes to policies and practices. So really, for a culture of assessment to happen, we have to think about all the pockets where learning is happening in a university culture, and then go there and involve students, invite them into the process of assessing learning.
I appreciate how rich the illustrations were from our panelists, but also concise. So we are exactly on time. As I turn things over to my colleague, Oon, who's been paying attention to the chat. So we have about 15 minutes for additional conversation, and then I'll come back at the end to close out the session and let.
Yeah, so we don't have any specific questions, but there are a couple of comments that I think point to some topics the panelists could perhaps expand upon. It's not too late. If folks have some questions now that are on your mind based on what folks shared, please go ahead and share your questions in the chat. But I do want to start out with something that a colleague mentioned and shared how there are still stigma and taboos around learning and mental disabilities across cultures that may impact whether students will even seek support around disabilities, right? So Hillary, Jim, or others, could you say more about this and how we can take this into consideration for assessment?
Well, I think that's definitely an issue, right? I mean, as I mentioned, the numbers that we had that had registered with Accessible NU, if you go back 8 years ago, we had 900 students registered with ANU. We've doubled that number. So those students aren't new students here per se. It's just new to that process and have come forward and registered. So you're absolutely right. There is still, we know that the percentage of the population that has a disability is somewhere between 15 and 20%. That's definitely not the percentage of students that have registered for accommodations at Northwestern. There are still a number of students that have these conditions that have absolutely not registered. And I think a lot of these strategies that folks talked about today, from transparency to options to varying your assessments, that can help not just those folks that have accommodations, but that can help those who haven't realized that they may need them yet or haven't come forward looking for those just yet. And by offering those different types of assessments, we're making it equitable for everybody as well.
So something, Jim, that you said, haven't even realized that they might need or benefit from some extra support. So like I said, I teach either master's or PhD students, and I taught since about 2016, 2017. And in that time, I have noticed a lot of students saying that they were having, trouble with the assessments or having trouble with some aspect of the way that the assessment was kind of implemented. And a lot of them kind of needed to be told that maybe they should talk to somebody about whether this is an accommodation issue. A lot of them were very high achieving students all the way through kind of elementary, middle, high school, even their undergraduate careers. But when they got to their master's degree, that's when some of the either attention challenges started happening. That's when some anxiety started happening. That's when different stakes felt higher or different to them, and they weren't able to navigate it without a little bit more support, and knowing what that support looks like. I read an article the other day that we're seeing a lot more students kind of come later in life to the accessibility office, that they're not necessarily catching them in K-12 context because they can navigate those and they're high achieving students, so they always look like they're doing really well, but then they get to college and they're like, wait a second, I'm having trouble with this. Where do I go? How do I get help? Who can help me do this? And so I think sometimes it's not necessarily an all or nothing. It can be in the middle of a semester. It can be after a particular assignment. It can be after a particular set of midterms where you're like, whoa, I need some support here. This is not what I'm having trouble. I'm having challenges. And so I think that reinforcing for students that it doesn't have to be that all or nothing. It doesn't have to be that one time, way back in second grade. And so never again are you going to need support in a different way. That sort of like ongoing nature of it too.
Thank you both for sort of addressing that prompt and comment. We actually have a question that just got posted, and try to paraphrase it, that one of our panelists mentioned something about, quote, moving the goalpost on students, end quote. So could you please elaborate on that or provide an example of what that means?
Yeah, I think that was mine. So I think I have worked with faculty in some settings that we have these like learning objectives or outcomes that we're interested in with our assignments. And then the students do really well on that assignment and achieve the objectives, but there's sort of this like inherent, like, I can't give everyone an A. Can I give everyone an A? And so then started kind of moving toward grading the papers in relation to each other, not necessarily in relation to the objectives. And so that is kind of like moving the goalposts. You had these clear objectives, you had these clear outcomes. And instead of saying, okay, I'm fine with everyone doing well on this assignment, saying, well, since everyone did well, these people did more well. So I'm going to give these people the better well and give these people the worse well. And you could tell in the feedback too, like the feedback that people give on those assignments are, you met everything, but all these other things that you didn't know I was going to grade for are now part of your grade. All these other things that I didn't say I was looking for, I've now decided to look for. And so if just kind of being clear and sticking to what you say you're going to look for and how you say, like what you say is important to the learning, and letting kind of the grades fall where they may, so to speak. Does that help?
Great. So we have a couple more questions that came in, but I do want to loop back to something that I noticed and hope that maybe Lori could say a little bit more. So Lori was describing what assessment means generally, and a colleague posted that they've heard assessment discussed as both or either formative assessment and summative assessment, with summative assessment being quote unquote grades. So Lori or others on the panel, can you perhaps talk a little bit more about this?
Absolutely. So yes, formative and summative assessment, these are big terms that we hear in assessment. Summative does not necessarily mean grades. What they're really about are capturing moments in time of where we're collecting data about student learning. So formative are those in the moment so that we can be responsive quickly, like either within the same session or within, say, the next couple of class sessions. Where summative, it's about the end of a process. And that often will happen, say, at the program level. So again, like I come from a lot of writing programs. And so what we would do after grades were submitted, we would all gather, we would bring student papers, swap them, share them, use a rubric to see as a program, did we feel like our students were meeting learning outcomes? So grades were not involved, but it was information to let us know how we might want to adapt our program and some of our approaches for summative assessment. So yeah, so both can be separate from grades.
Great, thanks for clarifying. So I want to loop back into a question that was actually asked in the chat. And that is, so we do have a question referring to someone talking about using emojis or icons on exercises and assignments to be transparent and reminding students of the learning objectives. They were wondering if you could clarify whether that was something done as an undergrad or graduate class or group. And specifically, this colleague is just wondering if it will work equally well for both groups, or if perhaps graduate students might find it too, and the term they said was basic.
Yeah, I mean, I really think, so I was the one who talked about that. I've done it in both undergraduate and graduate classes. I think so much of it is about knowing your audience and your personality as an instructor. I've working with some of the faculty in Medill's integrated media communications master's programs, and they use numbers as a way, so it's like learning goal 1.1. And so then as they're going through different assignments, they're using number codes. So that might feel more professional, but I think that mapping is still really helpful for the transparency to help people see exactly how all of the pieces are working towards the larger goals.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, in our graduate classes at SPS, we frequently use call-out boxes or, a set of horizontal lines or highlights to call out that same information. So there's a lot of ways that you can call out that information visually. I know sometimes people see, the cute little icons or emojis, and I think that that graphic style, sometimes I worry even that the graphics will look dated and students will think, when was this course last updated? So I think that there's a lot of ways that you can tie information together visually for students. And that's the important thing to consider, is how you're guiding students through the class and reminding them of the goals and the context.
If I can add on to it, I think the emoji you choose, right? Someone had mentioned a learning outcome related to public speaking. So it could be a public speaking microphone, and the exercise of you putting those visual icons in helps you know that you have mapped your assessments to your learning outcomes for the class, that you haven't missed them or you're not overly assessing one particular learning outcome.
Great, thanks. And I think I have one more question, and that is that a colleague asked a question here, and they teach an online course, and they wonder if adult learners who return to school in an online modality, whether there is research or any other information about increased anxiety related to online learning. So Jackie or others who do or have experience instructing online or asynchronous courses, could you share something about this or any insight for us?
What a great question. I don't know of any research related to increased anxiety related to online learning, but one thing that we do see and that we focus on in our online classes is a sense of isolation among students is one of the biggest reasons why adult students don't persist in online degrees. And so one thing that we really encourage our faculty to do is be really mindful about building that sense of connection and community among their courses so that students feel connections both to the faculty member, the course content, and the other students in the course, especially given that we work with an adult student population who are pursuing career goals. And so we really want them to be be able to build a network and support each other as they move into the next steps of their lives. But I have a counseling background, so just based on what those two fields coming together, I would imagine that building community in classes does reduce student anxiety when they feel like they have a support network. And I think we have to do that in a lot more mindful ways online, because they're not, when people are in the same place physically, it's kind of an automatic community. But that's a great question. And I probably plan to spend the rest of the day falling into a black hole of seeing if there is research about it.
And can I just add to that a little bit? I'm not sure about research either, and I don't know in terms of the adult population, but I can share a little bit about what we experienced during COVID when we went all online with some of our students. And I think Jackie's right, and in that respect, in the respect of not being able to build that community and support network, there can be some anxiety there, but there was actually some impact positively on students with anxiety when we went online, because they felt like they could slow things down a little bit, right? If people had recordings going, if they missed something, they weren't anxious about that. They could go back and review what it was that they had missed. The use of captioning on there helped people feel like they were understanding things a little bit better and picking things up a little bit more quickly, and that reduced some of that anxiety as well. So there's two pieces to that, right? In some respect, it can cause some, in others, it can reduce anxiety a little bit also.
That's great. Thank you for moderating the Q&A, and I really appreciate Anne's question turning us to the research on the socio-emotional dynamics of the learning process. And I want to call your attention to the recommended session on as a student panel focusing on these questions around well-being, which will be on Wednesday from 12 to 1. So we'll definitely be showcasing more of that evidence base of understanding students' emotional dynamics as they navigate grading and assessment. So thank you very much for a rich conversation with Lori, Jim, Hillary, and Jackie, and we're excited to be part of this 3-week practicum with all of you. We look forward to your continued engagement. So please feel free to use the chat to make any final comments or to thank our panel, and we will wrap up a few minutes early so all of you can get to your next event or meeting today.